Now, according to the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, 1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver. 1 in 2 will become one. About $1.3 billion is lost in productivity per year. This is the equivalent of about 500,000 Canadian employees dropping out of the labor force. And more than 7.8 million Canadians over the age of 15 provide approximately 20 hours a week of unpaid care. Well, to help us dig deeper on the role of caregivers and how employers can play an important role in assisting in employees in their caregiving journey, I have in studio with me Cynthia Iorio. Cynthia is a certified caregiving consultant and founder of Monarch Solutions with over a decade of experience as a corporate program manager. Cynthia equips professionals to navigate caregiving transitions using executive-level tools and thinking. She's also the host of a wonderful podcast called Love, Transform, Evolve. This is a podcast exploring caregiving as a leadership journey. Cynthia, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Thank you so much for having me here, Matt.
Thank you. You know, we were just saying off air, Robin Flynn, who many CJD listeners know about, introduced us, and I'm so glad that she did. Thank you, Robin. Cynthia, you're working very hard, advocating a lot for caregivers and their loved ones. So as mentioned, you're the host of a podcast called Love, Transform, Evolve that recently released its 3rd season. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell us about the podcast and why you wanted to start it.
So the podcast was born really out of a labor of love. I was a caregiver twice in my life. The first time I was 34. My mother was suddenly diagnosed with metastatic bladder cancer. And the second time I was 41, just a few years later, and my father had a terminal disease. And the thing that happened both times was I realized that the illnesses were not only happening to them, but my life was changing as well. And after I had time to reflect and think back on the experience, I realized that I too was transformed by it. And so the podcast was born out of this want, need, desire to normalize the experience. I found more and more I felt comfortable to speak with people. They too shared how caregiving transformed them. And so that's where the podcast started.
Good on you. You know, Life Unrehearsed is one of the core foundations is to help caregivers, and because life is unrehearsed. Listen to your story. Talk about life unrehearsed. So good on you. It takes a lot of guts, a lot of work to start it up. And in your 3rd season, your guests range from financial advisors to physical therapists and neuroscientists. Why so diverse?
So the thing is that caregiving is often born out of a healthcare need, but our responsibilities when we're caring for people go far beyond what health is specifically. And what I wanted to do, the podcast being named Love, Transform, Evolve, was to give an evolved way of looking at how we can care for other people. So how can we be better in our finances? How can we be better and understand how we make decisions? And so I wanted to speak to people who could give us this context so that when we are eventually faced with this, we could be armed with a little bit more information and power in the role.
Information and power is exactly right. Sometimes when you're in that caregiver role and you're in deep, you're not thinking straight, you're tired, you're exhausted, and it's always good to have the resources and networks to help out through the caregiving journey. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Delvecchio here, and I'm talking with Cynthia Iorio about the challenges of caregiving and how employers can step up to support their employees. Let's get into, employers and what would you say the role of the employer plays in the formula of care or caregiving?
So one of the things that I attribute to my success, if you would, as a caregiver for caring for both of my parents, which truly was life-changing, ripped me from my life, was extremely challenging and transformative, as I said, was the fact that I had supportive employers. Supportive in the way of them highlighting for me different resources that were available to me, giving me the space to talk about what was happening, but also to take the leaves that I needed to take. And we live in a very different paced society today with work and technology being at our fingertips almost, at every moment. And it's really important that employers step up and foster cultures within their environments that allow their employees to know that it's okay for them to be juggling work and life.
It's an important point, and it's evolving, right? And employers, sometimes it's tough for employers, and they're losing productivity from employees. There are some fantastic employers that are doing a great job there are many other employers that really, they don't see it or they don't want to see it. So let's advocate for employers really to help out those employees. I want to get back to your experience caring for your parents. It was almost two separate caregiving journeys your case. Yes. And you've mentioned that it's almost a privilege and a superpower. So why do you say that?
Caregiving was, I want to say, the most human experience I have ever had. It highlighted my strengths and it amplified my weaknesses. And the struggle of trying to figure out the right systems, the struggle of trying to figure out the balance between saving someone, which I now ultimately know you can't, it's not any one person's responsibility to save anyone, but this balance of quality of life with ambition and wanting to do things. On the flip side of it, having been able to look back at it, it was such an honor to be able to do that and go through that, because I walk through the world today with a different perspective, with a different appreciation and empathy towards what other people might be going through.
And you're speaking from the heart. You've experienced it firsthand. We're running out of time, but it's so important. You've had a lot of guests. You've had personal experience. For our listeners here that either are about to begin their caregiving journey or are in the middle of it or even at the end of it, what words of advice can you give to caregivers that find themselves struggling to care for a loved one?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I don't just want to talk to caregivers, because people don't necessarily call themselves caregivers. They call themselves children, they call themselves spouses or parents. So I want to talk to anybody right now who is supporting somebody through a healthcare crisis. This is a space where duality lives, where there can both be really heavy, difficult times, but also really good times. And it's important to look for the good moments, because those are the ones that help you get through. And on behalf of everybody you are caring for, I want to personally thank you, because the healthcare system especially is dependent on you. So thank you.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about the healthcare system. I mean, we knock our healthcare system. The people in the healthcare system are truly doing, the vast majority of them are doing the best they can with limited resources. And
Absolutely.
The challenges we're going to face as a society, as our population ages, the government just can't keep up with this growing population. So caregivers are going to be even more important down the road. Well, Cynthia, thank you for taking a little time and joining me in studio.
Thank you, Matt.
How can our listeners get a hold of you or listen to your podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast is available on Apple iTunes, on YouTube. It's on Spotify as well. So Love, Transform, Evolve. And to get in touch with me, monarchsolutions.com. Monarch is spelled ARQUE, the French way. So yeah, that's how they can get in touch.
Well, way to go, and good for you for advocating to employers. Very important, and best of luck in your podcast. I know it's certainly a grind, but you're doing a lot of good here. And again, thank you for coming in.
Appreciate it.
All right, that's Cynthia Iorio, founder of Monarch Solutions and the host of Love, Transform, Evolve, a great podcast exploring caregiving as a leadership journey.